In an isolated mansion, an elderly woman begins to wither as her daughter-in-law controls every detail of her routine. What seems like care hides a dark plan only a humble housekeeper and her son can see. The truth explodes during a gala dinner, revealing secrets no one dared to face. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. The Ashworth Mansion stood imposingly in the Kensington district of London, like a monument to time and tradition. Its high walls, covered in centuries-old ivy, protected not just an architectural heritage, but decades of stories, secrets, and memories of a family that had spent generations building its name in London's high society. It was one of those November mornings, with the grey sky typical of a London winter, when Claire was climbing the marble staircase, carrying Lady Eleanor's breakfast tray. Her steps were silent, almost reverent, the result of 15 years working in that house. 15 years of knowing every room, every object, every habit of the family's matriarch. Lady Eleanor Ashworth had always been a woman of striking presence. At 78, she maintained her upright posture, her hair impeccably styled in a low bun, and that penetrating gaze that seemed to read people like open books. Claire fondly remembered the times when her employer would come down for breakfast at 7 o'clock sharp, already elegantly dressed, scented with her favorite Chanel perfume, ready to command the house and receive guests throughout the day. But something had changed in recent months. Claire gently pushed open the door to the master bedroom, a spacious room with rosewood furniture and burgundy velvet curtains that filtered the weak morning light. Lady Eleanor was sitting in the armchair by the window, a silk dressing gown enveloping her increasingly frail body, her gaze lost somewhere beyond the garden. "Good morning, Lady Eleanor. I've brought your breakfast just as you like it." The elderly woman took a few seconds to respond, as if Claire's voice needed to travel a long distance to reach her. "Ah, Claire, good morning, my dear." Her voice was weak, almost a whisper. Claire felt a tightness in her chest as she placed the tray on the side table. The porcelain cup, the warm croissant, the apricot jam that Lady Eleanor had always cherished. Everything was there, but the lady barely touched her breakfast. "Aren't you going to eat anything?" "I'm not hungry, my child. You can leave it there." Claire hesitated. She wanted to say something, to ask if everything was all right, if there was anything she could do. But before she could find the right words, she heard firm footsteps in the hallway. Footsteps she recognized from a distance. "Good morning, Claire. I'll take it from here." Patricia's voice was polite, but it carried an authority that left no room for questions. Lady Eleanor's daughter-in-law entered the room with a rehearsed smile, wearing an impeccable beige-tailored suit, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed. Claire gave a brief curtsy and left the room, but not before casting one last look at Lady Eleanor. The elderly woman's gaze remained distant, as if she hadn't even noticed the change of presence in the room. Descending the stairs, Claire found her son Thomas sitting in the kitchen, drinking hot chocolate prepared by Anne, the housecook. The 10-year-old boy smiled when he saw his mother, his brown eyes shining with the pure joy that only children can maintain, even in the face of hardship. Thomas had been born with mild cerebral palsy that affected his legs, forcing him to use crutches to get around. But what he lacked in physical mobility, he made up for in perception and intelligence. The boy was observant, attentive to every detail, every unspoken word, every silence laden with meaning. "Mum, is Lady Eleanor any better today?" Claire sat down beside her son and stroked his dark hair. "Not much, my love. She's still very quiet." "It's been a long time since she smiled, hasn't it? I remember when she used to play with me in the garden. She'd tell me stories about her grandparents, about when she was a little girl." Claire sighed. Thomas was right. Lady Eleanor had always been affectionate with the boy, treating him with the same tenderness she would a grandson. But for the past few weeks the lady had barely left her room. "Things change, son, people get tired." "But she doesn't just seem tired, Mum. She seems sad." Before Claire could reply, Patricia entered the kitchen. Her smile remained on her face, but her eyes assessed everything with a calculated coldness. "Claire, I need to talk to you about Lady Eleanor's routine. I've been implementing some changes for her well-being." "Of course, Mrs. Patricia." Patricia pulled out a chair and sat down with the posture of someone about to give important instructions. Thomas watched everything in silence, his hands wrapped around his mug of chocolate. As you know, my mother-in-law is at a delicate stage in her life. Forgetfulness, confusion, loss of energy. It's natural for her age, but we need to be more rigorous with her care. Therefore, I have established new times for meals, rest periods, and, most importantly, control over visitors. Control over visitors, ma'am? Yes. Lady Eleanor gets tired easily with too many people around. Her friends, as well-intentioned as they are, end up agitating her too much, bringing up subjects that make her anxious. I've decided that for now visits will be suspended, only close family. Claire felt a growing unease. Lady Eleanor's friends were an essential part of her routine. The group of ladies who gathered every Thursday for afternoon tea, talking about books, politics, life. Those were moments when her employer would light up, laugh, and actively participate in conversations. But she has always enjoyed those visits so much. Perhaps it would help her feel better. Patricia smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Claire, I understand your concern. Truly, you've worked here for many years and are fond of my mother-in-law, but now I, as her daughter-in-law and part of the family, am taking on this responsibility. Richard is always so busy with business, and someone needs to take proper care of his mother. I've been reading a lot about mental health in the elderly, and controlled isolation can be beneficial when there are signs of mental confusion. Does Lady Eleanor seem confused? Sometimes. Minor episodes. Nothing serious yet, but it's better to be safe than sorry. That's why I'll also be controlling her diet more carefully. No excessive sweets, no strong coffee. A balanced, light diet. Claire wanted to argue, to say she had never noticed any mental confusion in Lady Eleanor, only a growing sadness, but she knew it wasn't her place to question the family's decisions. She was just an employee who depended on that job to support her son. I understand, Mrs. Patricia. I will follow the new instructions. Excellent. I knew I could count on you. Patricia stood up and left the kitchen, leaving behind an expensive perfume and a sense of discomfort. Thomas looked at his mother with his intelligent eyes. Mum, what she said isn't right. What do you mean, son? Lady Eleanor isn't confused. I talk to her when you're busy. She remembers everything. She knows my name, her parents' names. She tells stories from the past. In detail, she's just sad. Very sad. Claire hugged her son, feeling the weight of his words. Thomas was only 10, but he saw things many adults ignored. We'll keep an eye on things, okay? But be careful what you say. We can't cause any trouble. Thomas nodded, but Claire saw a determined glint in the boy's eyes. She knew that look. It was the same one he had when he decided to understand something that didn't make sense to him. The following days brought subtle but constant changes. Patricia had completely taken over the supervision of Lady Eleanor. The bedroom curtains remained closed for most of the day, under the pretext that the bright light hurt the elderly woman's eyes. Visits were indeed suspended, and when one of Lady Eleanor's friends showed up unannounced, Patricia received her at the door politely but firmly, explaining that her mother-in-law was on absolute rest per doctor's orders. Claire noticed that Lady Eleanor had started to lose weight. Her clothes hung loosely on her body, and her eyes, once lively and alert, now seemed dull. The lady would spend hours sitting in the same position, staring into space. One afternoon, while tidying the room, Claire found Lady Eleanor with a photo album in her lap. They were old black and white images of a happy family. The elderly woman ran her fingers over the photos gently, as if she could touch the past. My friends don't visit me anymore, Claire. Her voice was weak, heavy with a deep sadness. I'm sure they still think of you, Lady Eleanor. Perhaps they're just respecting your need for rest. Rest? Everyone talks about rest. But I don't want to rest, Claire. I want to live. I want to talk, to laugh, to go out into the garden. I feel like I'm slowly disappearing and no one notices. Claire felt tears burn her eyes. She wanted to hug her employer, to tell her that she did notice, that she saw the suffering in those eyes. But before she could respond, Patricia entered the room. Lady Eleanor, you shouldn't tire yourself with old albums. Shall we rest for a bit? I'm not tired, Patricia. I just wanted to look at the photos. I know it seems harmless, but these old memories can bring on unnecessary melancholy. It's better to focus on the present, on the now. Patricia took the album from Lady Eleanor's hands gently but with determination. Claire saw the elderly woman's gesture of resistance, her fingers trying to hold onto the pages for another second before giving in. "Claire, you can take this to the library, and since you're here, you can bring Lady Eleanor's tea. No sugar, remember." As Claire left the room with the album in her hands, she found Thomas in the hallway. The boy was leaning on his crutches, and from his expression, Claire knew he had witnessed everything. That evening, in the small cottage that Claire and Thomas shared at the back of the property, mother and son talked as they had dinner. "Mum, I've been thinking a lot about Lady Eleanor." "Me too, son. She's so different." "It's not just different. It's like she's being erased. Every day, a little piece of her disappears. And Mrs. Patricia makes it seem normal, like it's care, but it's not care, it's something else." Claire looked at her son, impressed by the maturity of his words. "And what do you think it is?" "Control. Mrs. Patricia is controlling everything. What she eats, who she sees, even her memories. And everyone believes it's for Lady Eleanor's own good. But son, Mrs. Patricia is family. Why would she do that?" Thomas was silent for a moment, thoughtful. "I don't know, but I think we should pay attention. Observe. Take notes." "Take notes?" "Yeah, I'm going to start a notebook. I'll write down everything I notice. Dates, times, things Lady Eleanor says, things Mrs. Patricia does. That way, if anyone ever asks, we'll have proof of what's happening." Claire was torn. On one hand, she admired her son's sensitivity and courage. On the other, she feared the consequences. If they were discovered, they could lose their job, the house they lived in. But looking into Thomas's determined eyes, she knew she couldn't stop him. "All right, but be very careful, my love. Very careful." That same night, Thomas took a school notebook left over from the previous year and wrote on the first page in his childish but neat handwriting, "Notes on Lady Eleanor." Underneath, he put the date and began to record. November 5th. Lady Eleanor ate almost nothing for breakfast. She stared out the window for hours. Mrs. Patricia wouldn't let her look at the photo album. Said old memories are bad for her, but memories aren't bad. Memories are who we are. As Thomas wrote, Claire looked out the window of the small cottage towards the illuminated mansion. Inside, Lady Eleanor was probably already in bed, alone in her immense room, surrounded by luxury but distant from everything that gave her life meaning. And Patricia, probably in her study, was planning the next step in her silent strategy. In the mansion's living room, Richard Ashworth arrived home from another exhausting day at work. Tall, with greying hair and shoulders hunched by the weight of responsibility, he barely looked up from his phone as he loosened his tie. Patricia greeted him with a kiss on the cheek and a glass of whiskey. "How was your day?" "Tiring. The negotiations with the investors are tense. And you? How is my mother?" "Well, resting a lot. I've implemented a healthier routine for her. Controlled diet, regular hours, less excitement." "Excellent. You've been taking such good care of her, Patricia. I don't know what we'd do without you." Patricia smiled and caressed her husband's face. "It's my duty, darling. Your mother deserves all the care in the world, and you need to focus on the business. Let me handle everything. Here." Richard nodded, relieved to have someone he could trust. He loved his mother, but between his professional commitments and the constant pressure of maintaining the family's business empire, he barely had time to visit her. Knowing that Patricia was shouldering this responsibility brought him peace. What he didn't see, and perhaps didn't want to see, were the subtle signs, the growing sadness in his mother's eyes when he paid her a quick visit, the silence where there used to be lively conversations, the apathy where there used to be energy. Or perhaps he did see, but preferred to believe. It was just old age advancing, as everyone said. It was easier that way, more comfortable. That night, Lady Eleanor lay awake in her dark room. She couldn't sleep. She felt like a stranger in her own home, in her own life. Everything that had once been hers now seemed to belong to someone else. Her choices, her desires, her voice. She thought about getting up, going to her son's room, talking to him, but she knew Patricia was always watchful, always vigilant. Any movement outside the established routine would be noticed, questioned, rationalized as mental confusion. So Lady Eleanor closed her eyes and did the only thing she could still do freely. She remembered. She remembered when she was young, strong, decisive. She remembered the husband she had loved and lost 10 years ago. She remembered raising her son alone, commanding that house with a firm but fair hand. And she remembered who she was before she became invisible. On the other side of the mansion, in his small room, Thomas was also awake. He held the notebook to his chest and promised himself he wouldn't let Lady Eleanor disappear. Not without a fight. Because sometimes, the boy thought, the weakest are the only ones who see the truth. And sometimes the truth needs a voice, even if it's the voice of a child who can barely walk on his own. The first stars began to appear in the London sky, silent witnesses to a story that was just beginning to unfold. The following weeks brought an increasingly harsh winter to London. The mornings dawned cold, with a thick fog that blanketed Kensington and transformed the Ashworth mansion into a ghostly silhouette. But the cold that bothered Claire the most didn't come from outside. It came from the silent corridors, from Lady Eleanor's empty gazes, from the increasingly heavy atmosphere that hung over the house. Thomas kept his notebook hidden inside a drawing folder, away from prying eyes. Every night before bed, he added new observations with the seriousness of an experienced investigator, despite being only 10 years old. November 12th. Mrs. Patricia put locks on Lady Eleanor's bedroom windows. She said it's for safety, to prevent her from getting hurt. But Lady Eleanor doesn't even get out of bed by herself. Why does she need locks? November 15th. Lady Eleanor's friend, Lady Beatrice, called 3 times. Mrs. Patricia answered every call and said her mother-in-law was sleeping, but I saw Lady Eleanor awake, sitting in her armchair. She heard the phone ring, and her eyes looked sad. November 18th. Today, Lady Eleanor asked to go to the garden. It's been over a month since she left her room. Mrs. Patricia said the weather was too cold, that she could get pneumonia. But on other, colder days, she left the windows open, saying fresh air is good for her. Claire read her son's notes every night, and with each page she felt her heart ache. The boy was right. There was a pattern. Each of Patricia's decisions seemed reasonable on its own, but together they formed an ever-tightening net of control around Lady Eleanor. "Mum, we need to talk to Mr. Richard." Thomas was sitting at the table in their small kitchen, distractedly stirring the plate of rice and beans Claire had made for dinner. "Son, it's not that simple." "Why not? He's her son. He should know what's happening." Claire sighed, helping herself to some salad. "Mr. Richard trusts his wife, and we're employees, Thomas. Our word against hers, who do you think he's going to believe?" "But we have the notebook, we have proof." "They're a child's notes, my love. I don't want you to get hurt by this. If Mrs. Patricia finds out, we could lose everything. Our job, our home." Thomas looked down at his plate, but Claire could see the determination still burning in his eyes. "So we're just going to let Lady Eleanor disappear? Pretend we don't see it?" The question hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Claire had no answer, because the truth was, she didn't know what to do either. She was trapped between the fear of losing her livelihood and a conscience that was screaming louder every day. "We'll keep observing, okay, but carefully, very carefully." That same week, Patricia implemented another change to the routine. During breakfast, as Claire was organizing the pantry, she overheard the conversation between Patricia and Richard. "Darling, I think we need to hire a private nurse for your mother." Richard looked up from his newspaper, surprised. "A nurse? Is she ill?" "Not exactly ill, but frail. She needs more specialized care. Controlled medication, constant monitoring." "What medication?" "For anxiety. I've noticed she gets very agitated sometimes, talking to herself, asking for nonsensical things. A doctor friend of mine recommended a mild sedative, just to help." Claire almost dropped the tray she was holding. "Lady Eleanor on anxiety medication? Since when? You consulted a doctor without telling me?" Richard seemed slightly annoyed, but Patricia approached him with her reassuring smile. "Darling, you were so overwhelmed with the quarterly negotiations. I didn't want to worry you with details. It was just an informal consultation with Dr. Miles, the psychiatrist who treats Fiona's family. He came here, spoke with your mother, and suggested the treatment. And did my mother agree? She's confused, Richard. Sometimes she doesn't understand what's best for her. That's why I need to make these decisions. It's our responsibility to protect her, even from herself. Richard nodded slowly, turning his eyes back to the newspaper. All right. Do what you think is best. You've been taking such good care of her. When Patricia left the room, Claire realized her hands were shaking. Medication. A private nurse. Each step seemed to be taking Lady Eleanor further away, to a place where no one else could reach her. The nurse arrived 2 days later. Her name was Sonia, a middle-aged woman with a serious face and eyes that revealed no emotion. Patricia greeted her personally and gave detailed instructions. Mrs. Eleanor must take her medication at the exact times, 8 in the morning and 8 at night. If she resists, explain that it's a doctor's order. Don't let her refuse. And if she asks what she's taking, tell her they're vitamins, supplements for her age. Claire was mopping the hallway and overheard everything. Vitamins. Another lie disguised as care. That afternoon, Claire went up to Lady Eleanor's room with the excuse of changing the sheets. The nurse, Sonia, was sitting in a chair beside the bed reading a magazine, while Lady Eleanor stared blankly at the ceiling. "Good afternoon, Lady Eleanor." The elderly woman turned her head slowly, and Claire was shocked to see her eyes. They were glazed, distant, as if she were floating somewhere between sleep and wakefulness. "Claire, you came." Her voice was slurred, thick. "I came to change your sheets. How are you feeling?" "Tired. Always tired. They give me medicine, say it's to help me, but I just want to sleep. To sleep, and never wake up." Claire's heart raced. "Don't say that, Lady Eleanor. You still have so much life ahead of you." "What life, Claire? What kind of life is this? I don't see anyone, I don't go out, I don't decide anything. I'm a doll. An old doll. No one wants to play with anymore." Tears began to roll down the old woman's wrinkled face, silent and painful. Claire glanced at the nurse, but Sonia continued reading her magazine, indifferent to the suffering beside her. Claire wanted to hug Lady Eleanor, to scream that she saw what was happening, that she wasn't crazy or confused, that she was being silenced. But all she could manage was to gently squeeze her employer's hand before leaving the room with the sheets in her arms and tears burning her own eyes. Thomas was in the garden when his mother left the mansion. The boy was sitting on the stone bench under the ancient chestnut tree, his favorite thinking spot. Claire approached and sat beside him. "She's worse, isn't she?" Claire nodded, unable to speak. "It's because of the medicine. I looked it up on the internet at the school library. Sedatives can make people like that, confused, slow, sad. How do you know she's taking sedatives? I saw the nurse give them to her. Yesterday, when I went to bring fresh flowers for the vase in her room, the nurse gave her 2 pills and said they were vitamins. But vitamins don't make anyone look like that." Claire pulled her son into a tight hug. "What are we going to do, Mum?" "I don't know, son. I don't know." The days continued to pass, each one heavier than the last. The mansion that was once full of life now felt like a mausoleum. Lady Eleanor hardly ever left her bed. When Claire went up with her meals, she would find the lady either asleep or with that lost look that broke her heart. Patricia, on the other hand, seemed increasingly in control. She moved through the house with the confidence of someone who knows she is in charge, giving orders, rearranging rooms, even deciding on the flower arrangements that Lady Eleanor used to choose. One afternoon, while tidying the library, Claire found several letters stacked in a drawer. They were from Lady Eleanor's friends, Beatrice, Margaret, Helen, all asking about their friend's health, sending their love, suggesting visits. None had been delivered to the addressee. Claire picked up one of the letters and read it. Beatrice wrote with affection, telling her about the book club that missed Eleanor's presence, about how the group wasn't the same without her. She said she had called several times, but was always told her friend was sleeping. The letter ended with a sentence that echoed in Claire's mind. "If you need anything at all, we'll be there. True friends don't abandon each other." Claire put the letter back in the drawer, but she photographed all of them with her phone. She didn't know why, but something told her they would be important. That night, Thomas added more notes to his notebook. November 25th. Lady Eleanor's friends wrote letters. None were delivered. They are all hidden in the library. Lady Eleanor thinks she's been forgotten, but she hasn't. She's being hidden. November 26th. Lady Eleanor cried today. I heard her through the door. She said she wanted to leave, that this wasn't her home anymore. The nurse didn't say anything. She just turned up the volume on the television. November 27th. Mr. Richard visited his mother today. He only stayed for 10 minutes. Lady Eleanor tried to talk to him, but her words came out jumbled because of the medicine. He left telling Mrs. Patricia that his mother was getting worse, but she's not getting worse. She's being made worse. At the end of November, something unexpected happened. Patricia announced she was hosting a dinner party for some friends. It was the first time in months that the mansion would receive guests. Claire and Anne received detailed instructions about the menu, the decorations, the service. Everything had to be perfect. Patricia wanted to impress, to show that she was the perfect hostess, the dedicated daughter-in-law, the lady of the house. And Lady Eleanor, Claire regretted the question as soon as she asked it. Patricia looked at her with a raised eyebrow. What about Lady Eleanor? Will she be joining the dinner? Patricia let out a short, humorless laugh. Claire, you know my mother-in-law is in no condition to participate in social events. It would be embarrassing for her and for the guests. She will have her dinner in her room as usual. But she always loved having guests over. Loved. Past tense. Things change, Claire. Your job is to prepare the house for the dinner, not to question my decisions about my family. The tone was sharp, making it clear the conversation was over. Claire lowered her head and left, but indignation was boiling inside her. That night, mother and son talked for a long time. Thomas was more convinced than ever that they needed to act, and Claire was more and more frightened of the consequences. Mum, the dinner party could be our chance. A chance for what? To show people what's happening. There will be guests, outsiders. If someone asks about Lady Eleanor, we can tell the truth. And you think anyone will believe us? We're employees, Thomas. Our word means nothing to these people. Then we don't talk, we show them. How? Let Lady Eleanor appear. Let her say what's happening herself. Claire looked at her son as if he had gone mad. Son, she can barely form sentences with the medication she's on. And even if she could, Patricia would never allow her to leave her room during the dinner. Thomas was silent for a moment, thinking, what if we stopped giving her the medicine a few days before the dinner? Thomas, that's dangerous. We don't know what could happen. Mum, what's happening now is already dangerous. Lady Eleanor is disappearing. If we don't do anything, in a few months she won't be here anymore. Not really. Claire knew her son was right, but fear paralyzed her. Fear of losing her job, her home, her security, fear of confronting Patricia and the entire power structure she represented. I'll think about it, okay? I'll think about it. But while Claire thought the days kept passing, the dinner party was approaching, and Lady Eleanor remained there, trapped in her own room, in her own house, watching her life be taken away piece by piece. Until one morning something changed. Claire went up with Lady Eleanor's breakfast and found the lady sitting up in bed, her eyes clearer than she had seen them in weeks. The nurse was not in the room. Claire, I need to ask you something. Her voice was still weak, but there was determination in it. What do you need, ma'am? I need you to help me. I know you're risking your job, your life, but I need someone to see me, someone to hear me. I can't live like this anymore. Lady Eleanor took Claire's hand with a surprising strength for someone so frail. They're erasing me, Claire, day by day. I'm disappearing, and the worst part is that my own son doesn't notice or doesn't want to notice. I see it, Lady Eleanor. My son and I, we see it. Then help me, please. At the dinner party Patricia is hosting, help me be there to speak. Just that. One chance to be heard. Claire felt the tears roll down her cheeks. This was the confirmation she had been waiting for. Lady Eleanor was not confused. She was not delusional. She was fully aware of everything that was happening to her, and she was asking for help. "I will help you, Lady Eleanor, I promise." When Claire left the room, she found Thomas waiting in the hallway. The boy must have heard everything. "Are we going to do this, Mum? For real?" Claire took a deep breath, feeling fear and courage battle within her. "We are, son. We're going to help Lady Eleanor, whatever happens." Thomas hugged his mother tightly, and there, in the cold hallway of that mansion, two simple hearts decided to face an entire system for the love of truth and the dignity of a woman who was being silenced. The dinner was set for the following Saturday. There were 5 days left, 5 days to plan, 5 days to give Lady Eleanor a chance to reclaim her voice, and 5 days for Claire and Thomas to prove that sometimes the weakest can be the strongest. The 5 days leading up to the dinner party passed at a frightening speed. Claire felt as if she were walking on a tightrope, each step measured with extreme care, each movement observed with heightened attention. Patricia was even more vigilant than usual, overseeing every detail of the preparations, every flower arrangement, every shopping list. The plan Claire and Thomas devised was simple but risky. For the 3 days before the dinner, Claire would convince the nurse, Sonia, to leave Lady Eleanor's room during medication times, using various excuses. They needed to allow time for the effects of the drugs to diminish, enabling the lady to regain some mental clarity. On the first day, Claire asked Sonia for help moving a heavy piece of furniture in the pantry, precisely at the time of the morning medication. The nurse resisted at first, but eventually gave in when Claire pretended to have hurt her back. On the second day, Anne, the cook, whom Claire had partially let in on the plan, created a small emergency in the kitchen, calling Sonia to help with a pressure cooker that was supposedly malfunctioning. Again, the timing coincided with the medication schedule. On the third day, it was Thomas himself who created the distraction. The boy pretended to have fallen in the garden, crying out in pain. Sonia, also responsible for first aid in the house, had to go down to assess the supposed injury. Each day, Claire would quickly go up to Lady Eleanor's room and discreetly hide the pills that should have been administered. She kept them in an old jewelry box she found in the room, knowing Patricia would never look there. And it worked. On the third day, without the full dose of medication, Lady Eleanor was already showing signs of improvement. Her eyes were less glazed, her voice firmer, her thoughts more organized. She was still physically weak, but her lucidity was returning. "Claire, I don't know how to thank you for what you're doing." "You don't need to thank me. You just need to be strong for Saturday." "I will be. I will use every ounce of strength I have left to speak the truth." On Saturday morning, the Ashworth mansion was a hive of activity. Patricia had hired extra staff of waiters and helpers to ensure everything was impeccable. The menu included sophisticated appetizers, a main course of lamb, and a selection of expensive wines that Richard had specially brought up from the cellar. Claire worked tirelessly, preparing the dining room, adjusting the porcelain dinnerware, polishing the silver cutlery, but her mind was focused on something else, on the plan, on the moment when everything could change. Thomas had spent the previous night reviewing his notes, organizing the most important information. The notebook was hidden under his shirt, ready to be shown if necessary. The guests were to arrive at 8 in the evening. There were 3 couples, all close friends of Richard and Patricia, successful business people, influential members of London society. Exactly the kind of audience Patricia wanted to impress. Around 7, Patricia descended the stairs in an elegant navy blue dress, her hair in a sophisticated updo, her makeup flawless. She looked like the personification of the perfect hostess. "Claire, is everything ready?" "Yes, Mrs. Patricia. The table is set, the appetizers are ready. The wine is at the ideal temperature." "Excellent. And my mother-in-law?" "She had her dinner in her room as usual. The nurse is with her." Patricia nodded, satisfied, and went to check the final details. What she didn't know was that Lady Eleanor hadn't eaten dinner. She was saving her energy, preparing herself. The guests began to arrive promptly at 8. Effusive greetings, kisses on the cheek, compliments on the decor. Richard received the couples with his corporate charm, while Patricia shone as the hostess she had always dreamed of being. Claire circulated discreetly with a tray of canapés, attentive to every conversation, every movement. Thomas was in the kitchen with Anne, but Claire knew the boy was on high alert, waiting for the right moment. The dinner began with the starters. The conversation flowed between business, politics, and the latest high society gossip. Patricia laughed at the right moments, made intelligent comments, and masterfully guided the conversation. It was during the main course that one of the guests, Fiona, an elegant woman with grey hair, asked the question that would change everything. "Patricia, and how is Lady Eleanor? I haven't seen her in ages. How is she?" There was a brief silence. Claire, who was pouring wine, felt the air grow thick. Patricia smiled, but Claire noticed the tension in her shoulders. "My mother-in-law is well, Fiona. Just resting more. Age, you know. She needs a lot of tranquility." "What a shame. Eleanor was always so lively, so present in everything. I remember the parties she used to throw here. They were magnificent." "They were indeed," agreed Mariana, another guest. "She had a special talent for bringing people together." Patricia maintained her smile, but Claire could see the irritation growing in her eyes. Well, things change. People get older. It's natural for her to want more peace and quiet. "I would love to say hello to her if possible," Fiona insisted. "Just for a minute. I'm so fond of her." Patricia was about to reply when they heard footsteps on the stairs. All eyes turned to the entrance of the dining room, and there she was, Lady Eleanor. She leaned heavily on the banister, each step a visible effort, but she descended with determination. She wore an emerald-green silk robe, her white hair loose on her shoulders, thin and frail, but with a spark in her eyes that hadn't been seen in months. Claire felt her heart pound. She was doing it. Lady Eleanor was really doing it. Patricia stood up so quickly her chair almost toppled over. "Eleanor, what are you doing? You should be in your room." But Lady Eleanor continued her descent, step by step, until she reached the bottom of the staircase. Richard had also stood up, confused and worried. "Mother, are you all right? Do you want me to take you back to your room?" "No, Richard. I don't want to go back. I want to stay here. I want to see people. I want to see people." Speak." Her voice came out shaky but firm. The guests watched the scene with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Fiona was the first to move, standing up and walking over to Lady Eleanor with a warm smile. "Eleanor, my dear, what a joy to see you. I've missed you so much." She hugged the old woman carefully, and Lady Eleanor closed her eyes, absorbing the human contact she had been denied for so long. "I've missed you too, Fiona. I've missed everyone." Patricia quickly approached, trying to take control of the situation. "Everyone, I do apologize. My mother-in-law isn't... Well, she's confused. I think it's best if I take her back." But Lady Eleanor pulled away from Patricia's touch. "I am not confused, Patricia. I am lucid, perhaps more lucid than I have been in months." The silence that followed was heavy. All eyes were fixed on Lady Eleanor. It was at that moment that Claire saw Thomas appear at the kitchen door. The boy held his notebook against his chest, his eyes wide, watching the scene unfold. Lady Eleanor walked slowly to the dining table. Richard pulled out a chair for her, and the lady sat down with difficulty but with dignity. Fiona returned to her seat. The other guests did the same. Patricia remained standing, her face pale, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Richard, still confused, sat down next to his mother. "Mother, what is happening?" Lady Eleanor looked around the table at each face present. Then she fixed her eyes on her son. "What is happening, my son, is that I am tired of being invisible, tired of being silenced, tired of living like a prisoner in my own home." Richard frowned. "A prisoner? Mother, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about how over the last few months I've been slowly erased. My visits were cancelled. My friends are no longer allowed to see me. My phone calls are intercepted. My wishes are ignored. And all of this under the pretext of care." The guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Patricia finally found her voice. "Eleanor, you're exaggerating. Everything we did was for your own good." "For my good?" Lady Eleanor turned to her daughter-in-law, and there were tears in her eyes, but there was also fire. "You drugged me, Patricia. You filled me with medication that left me confused, apathetic, without strength. You locked me in my room. You hid the letters from my friends. You made me believe I was going mad when in fact I was being systematically isolated." "That's not true." Patricia was losing her composure. "You were ill, confused. I was taking care of you." Caring or controlling? It was Claire who spoke. All eyes turned to her, standing by the sideboard, her heart beating so loudly it felt like everyone could hear it. Patricia glared at her with fury. "How dare you? You're just a maid." "I'm a maid who saw everything, Mrs. Patricia. I saw you. Cancel visits, hide letters, administer medication without any real need. I saw Lady Eleanor wither away day after day while you told everyone you were taking care of her." Thomas appeared beside his mother, leaning on his crutches, holding the notebook. "And I wrote it all down." The boy's voice was firm, fearless. He opened the notebook and began to read. November 5th. Lady Eleanor ate almost nothing. Mrs. Patricia wouldn't let her look at the photo album. November 12th. Locks on the bedroom windows. November 15th. 3 calls from Lady Beatrice ignored. November 25th. Letters from her friends hidden. Say in the library. Patricia tried to speak, but Richard raised a hand, calling for silence. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on Claire's son. "Continue." Thomas read a few more entries, his voice clear and steady, each sentence a concrete accusation, documented, impossible to ignore. When he finished, the silence in the room was absolute. Richard rose slowly and walked to the window, his back to everyone. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Mother, is this true? All of it?" Lady Eleanor nodded, the tears now rolling freely. "It is, my son. And the worst part is that I cried out for help in every way I could. But you were so busy, so distant, and Patricia was so convincing. She turned my pleas into mental confusion, my sadness into illness, my loneliness into a need for isolation." Richard turned around, and there were tears in his eyes too. "I didn't know. My godmother, I didn't know." Fiona, who had been watching in silence, spoke up. "Eleanor, my dear, your friends never abandoned you. Beatrice called my house several times asking about you. We were all worried, but we were always told you were sleeping or didn't want visitors." Lady Eleanor covered her face with her hands, sobbing. "I thought I had been forgotten, that no one cared anymore." Claire approached and gently placed a hand on the lady's shoulder. "You were never forgotten, only hidden." All eyes turned to Patricia. The woman was pale, trembling, realizing that the castle she had built was crumbling around her. "I only wanted what was best for you, Eleanor. You were getting old, frail. Someone had to make decisions. You didn't want what was best for me. You wanted control." Lady Eleanor stood up, leaning on the gay table. "You wanted to be the lady of this house, to make all the decisions, to have all the power, and you used me as an excuse for it." Patricia was about to reply when Richard interrupted her. "I think you should leave, Patricia, now." His voice was icy, sharp. Patricia looked at her husband, then at the guests, then at Claire and Thomas. She realized there was no way to reverse the situation. Without another word, she left the dining room, her heels echoing on the marble until they disappeared up the stairs. The dinner party, of course, ended early. The guests said their goodbyes with tight hugs for Lady Eleanor, promises of frequent visits, offers of help. Fiona stayed longer, holding her friend's hand, talking softly, reconnecting ties that had been severed. When everyone had finally gone, only Richard, Lady Eleanor, Claire and Thomas remained in the living room. Richard knelt beside his mother's chair. "Mother, forgive me. Forgive me for not seeing, for not being present, for believing lies when I should have believed you." Lady Eleanor caressed her son's face. "You were blind, my son. Sometimes we love people who aren't who we think they are. But now you see, and that's what matters." Richard turned to Claire and Thomas. "And you two. You risked everything for my mother. I have no words to thank you." Claire was about to reply when Thomas spoke up. "We didn't do anything special, Mr. Richard. Just what was right. Lady Eleanor deserved to be seen. She deserved to be heard. Richard looked at the boy, at the notebook still in his hands, and smiled through his tears. "You are very young, but you are braver than many adults I know, including me." That night Lady Eleanor slept in her room, but with the door open. No locks, no nurse, no unnecessary medication. She slept, knowing she had reclaimed her voice, her dignity, her life, and for the first time in months, her dreams were light. Sunday morning brought a different light to the Ashworth mansion. It wasn't just the timid September sun finally breaking through the grey clouds of the London winter. It was something deeper, a brightness that came from within, as if the house itself had awakened from a long nightmare. Claire climbed the stairs carrying the breakfast tray, but this time with a different weight in her chest. It was no longer the tightness of anguish, but the responsibility of one who had witnessed a transformation and was now a part of it. She knocked lightly on Lady Eleanor's bedroom door. "Come in, Claire." The voice that answered was weak, still marked by months of medication and isolation, but there was life in it. There was presence. Lady Eleanor was sitting in the armchair by the window, but this time the curtains were open, allowing light to flood the room. The silk robe had been replaced by a simple but elegant dress. Her hair was combed, and there was a light touch of lipstick on her lips. "Good morning, Lady Eleanor. I've brought your breakfast." "Good morning, my dear. Claire, sit with me for a moment." Claire hesitated. It wasn't common for her employer to ask for her company in that way, but she sat in the other armchair, her hands clasped in her lap. "I want to thank you, Claire. You and your son saved my life, not literally perhaps, but you saved who I am, and that is even more important." Tears welled up in Claire's eyes. "You don't need to thank me. We did what was right. Even knowing you could lose everything, your job, your home, your security? Even so. Because some things are more important than security, like dignity, like truth." Lady Eleanor took Claire's hand in hers, wrinkled yet firm. "You have raised an exceptional boy. Thomas is only 10, but he has more courage and character than many adults I've met in my 78 years. He has always been special. Despite his difficulties, or perhaps because of them, he sees the world in a different way. His difficulties don't define him, Claire. They only reveal who he truly is, and he is extraordinary." They spent a few moments in comfortable silence, just looking out the window at the garden that was beginning to bloom with the arrival of spring. It was Lady Eleanor who broke the silence. "Richard has asked me to see a doctor today, a real doctor chosen by me, not by Patricia." "That's good, Lady Eleanor." "It is. He wants to be sure there's no permanent damage from the medication. He wants a full report on my health." "And are you ready for that?" "I am, because for the first time in months I feel that my health belongs to me, my decisions belong to me, my life belongs to me." At that same moment, in another wing of the mansion, Richard was sitting in his study, looking out the window at the same garden. He hadn't slept all night. The revelation from the dinner party still echoed in his mind. Every word from his mother, every note from Thomas's notebook, every pained expression on her face. How had he not seen? How had he let this happen under his own roof? The door opened, and Patricia entered. She was pale, her eyes swollen from crying, but she held her posture erect. "Richard, we need to talk." He turned to face her, and she immediately saw that the man looking at her was no longer the confident, loving husband she had known. "I'm not sure there's much to talk about, Patricia. Please, give me a chance to explain." Richard gestured for her to sit, but he remained standing, arms crossed. Patricia took a deep breath. "I know what I did was wrong. I know I crossed lines. But I swear, in the beginning, I really thought I was taking care of your mother. She was so frail, so forgetful. I thought she needed structure, control. And when did you realize you were going too far? When did care turn into a prison?" Patricia lowered her eyes. "I don't know. It was gradual. Each decision seemed small, justifiable. Suspending a visit here, controlling a meal there, and suddenly I was in charge of everything. and it gave me a sense of importance I'd never had before. Richard shook his head in disbelief. Importance? You sacrificed my mother for a sense of importance. It wasn't just that. Patricia looked up, tears in her eyes. I grew up always, being the one who didn't matter. The middle child, never pretty enough, never smart enough. When I married you, I thought I would finally be someone. But your mother was so present, so strong. Everyone admired her, and I was just the daughter-in-law. So you isolated my mother to feel important. You turned her life into a hell because of your insecurity. Richard, I know there's no excuse. I know I was cruel, manipulative. But it wasn't out of malice. It was out of weakness. The silence that followed was heavy. Richard walked to the window again, his hands in his pockets. Patricia, you need help. Professional help. Because what you did is not normal. It is not acceptable. I know. I'll get help. I'll go to therapy, whatever it takes. But not here. Not in this house anymore. Patricia felt the tears roll down her cheeks. Are you asking me to leave? I am asking you to respect my mother's space, respect her recovery process, and respect yourself enough to recognize that you need to work on your own problems before you can be near either of us. And us? Our marriage? Richard turned to face her. Honestly, Patricia, I don't know. I don't know if there's any coming back from this. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. All I know is that my priority right now is my mother. She comes first. Patricia nodded slowly, wiping her tears. I understand. I'll pack my things. That afternoon, as Patricia packed her bags, the mansion seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Claire and Anne worked in the kitchen, preparing a special meal for Lady Eleanor, featuring the dishes she had always loved and which had been banned from the diet imposed by Patricia. Thomas was in the garden, sitting under the chestnut tree when Richard approached him. May I sit? The boy nodded, and Richard sat on the stone bench beside him. Thomas, I want to ask you a serious question. Do you think my mother can recover from what she's been through? The boy thought for a moment before answering. I think so. Lady Eleanor is strong, stronger than she looks. She was just being prevented from showing that strength. You're right. Richard looked at the notebook Thomas was still holding. May I see? Thomas hesitated, then handed over the notebook. Richard turned the pages slowly, reading each entry. At times he closed his eyes as if the words pained him. At others he shook his head in disbelief. When he finished, he returned the notebook to the boy. You know, Thomas, you did something I should have done. You paid attention, you saw what was happening, you acted. I just wrote down what I saw. But that was a great deal, because without your notes, without your courage to speak up, my mother would still be a prisoner, and I would still be blind. There was a pause before Richard continued. I have a proposal for you. I would like to pay for your education, a good private school where you can develop your full potential, and also treatments, therapies, anything that can help with your mobility. Thomas's eyes widened. Sir, it's not charity, Thomas. It's recognition. You saved my mother. It's the least I can do. But I don't want a reward. I just wanted Lady Eleanor to be okay. I know. And that's exactly why you deserve it. People who do the right thing without expecting anything in return are rare. I want to help you be all that you can be. Thomas was silent, processing. Then he smiled, that wide, genuine childhood smile. Can I talk to my mum? Of course. And Thomas, thank you. Truly. When Thomas told Claire about Richard's offer, the woman fell to her knees on the floor of their small cottage, crying. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of hope. Her son would have opportunities she had never dreamed possible. But Richard didn't stop there. 2 days later, he met with Claire in his study. Claire, I know you risked your job for my mother. You showed loyalty, courage, and compassion that go far, beyond what any employee would be required to do. I did what was right, Mr. Richard. I know, and for that I would like to offer you a new position. I want you to be the house manager, no longer just a staff member, but someone who oversees everything, who makes decisions, who has autonomy. Claire was speechless. In addition, a significant salary increase, full health insurance for you and Thomas, and the cottage where you live will be renovated and equipped with everything you need for your comfort. Mr. Richard, I don't know what to say. Say yes, because my mother trusts you, and after everything that has happened, I've learned that trust is the most valuable thing there is." Claire accepted, still in shock, still processing that her life was changing in ways she had never imagined possible. Meanwhile, Lady Eleanor began her recovery process. The doctor Richard hired, Dr. Finch, a respected geriatrician, conducted a full evaluation. The tests revealed that physically, Lady Eleanor was weak, but had no permanent damage. The greatest harm had been emotional and psychological. Prolonged social isolation was Dr. Finch's diagnosis, combined with inappropriate medication and excessive control. But the lady has remarkable resilience. With proper support, gradual socialization and therapeutic follow-up, a full recovery is very likely. Richard hired a therapist specializing in elderly mental health, Dr. Powell, who began visiting Lady Eleanor 3 times a week. The sessions were gentle, respectful, focused on rebuilding the lady's self-esteem and autonomy. Lady Eleanor's friends began to visit her regularly again. Beatrice, Margaret, Helen. The book club that had missed her so much now met in the mansion's living room every Thursday, just like in the old days. They laughed, discussed books, drank tea, and shared stories. And with each visit, each conversation, each small moment of normalcy, Lady Eleanor blossomed again. A month after the dinner that changed everything, the Ashworth mansion was unrecognizable, not structurally, but in its essence. The windows remained open, letting in light and fresh air. Music played through the rooms, voices and laughter echoed through the once silent corridors. Lady Eleanor had gained weight. Her face was less drawn, her eyes shone again. She spent her mornings in the garden, tending to the rose bushes she so loved. Her afternoons were dedicated to her friends, to reading, to small projects that gave her purpose. And her evenings were often spent talking with Richard, mother and son rebuilding a relationship that had been lost between commitments and distance. Patricia had not returned. She had moved into a flat in Chelsea and started intensive therapy, as promised. Richard visited her occasionally, but the meetings were formal, distant. The marriage was on hold, neither of them yet knowing if it could be rebuilt or if it was better to let it go. Thomas started at a new school, one of the best in London. At first he was afraid he wouldn't fit in, of being too different because of his crutches. But his intelligence and sensitivity soon won over classmates and teachers. He made friends. He participated in projects. He discovered a passion for writing and began to write short stories inspired by his experience. Claire took on her new position with dedication and competence. She coordinated the household staff with firmness but kindness, always remembering what it was like to be on the other side. Lady Eleanor consulted her on everything, valuing her opinion, treating her not as an employee but as an ally, a friend. And Richard, perhaps the one who had changed the most, drastically reduced his working hours. He delegated more responsibilities, hired competent executives, and prioritized quality of life over relentless profit. He spent mornings working from home, had lunch with his mother, and reserved afternoons for personal projects. He discovered there was life beyond the company, and that life was precious. 3 months after that fateful dinner, on a sunny December morning, Lady Eleanor gathered everyone on the veranda for an announcement. They were all there. Richard, Claire, Thomas, Anne, even some of the oldest household staff. "I want to thank all of you," Lady Eleanor began, her voice firm and clear. "You gave me back my life, my voice, my dignity. I have learned that family is not just about blood. It's about who stands by you in difficult times, who sees you when you become invisible, who fights for you when you no longer have the strength." She looked at Thomas especially. "And I have learned that courage has no age, that wisdom can come from a 10-year-old boy, that sometimes the young see truths that we, as adults, prefer to ignore." Thomas smiled, holding his mother's hand. Lady Eleanor continued, "I have decided to make some changes. This house, which was the scene of so much suffering in recent months, will be transformed. We will create a space of sanctuary, a place where elderly people who are going through situations of isolation or emotional abuse can come, be heard, and receive support. Everyone looked on in surprise. It will not be an institutional shelter. It will be a center for community, for listening, for reconnection. Because if I went through this, how many others are going through it right now? In silence, invisible, forgotten. Richard approached his mother. "Mother, I think that's a wonderful idea. I will help in any way necessary, structure, funding, staff." Lady Eleanor smiled at her son. "I know you will, my dear. And Claire, I would like you to coordinate the project. You know better than anyone what it's like to see suffering and want to help." Claire, moved, nodded. "It would be an honor, Lady Eleanor." And so it was that months later, the Ashworth mansion was transformed. An entire wing was renovated to welcome the elderly and their families. There were therapy rooms, common areas, therapeutic gardens, a library. The project was named the Eleanor House, a center for elderly support and dignity. Volunteers came from all over London, psychologists, occupational therapists, social workers. Lady Eleanor was present every day, talking with visitors, sharing her story, offering hope. Thomas, during his school holidays, also helped. He read to the elderly, played checkers, listened to their stories. His notebook of observations inspired a documentation project where families could record warning signs of abuse or isolation. The story of the Eleanor House reached the newspapers. Reports showed Lady Eleanor's transformation, a child's courage, a family's redemption. And with each published story, more people felt encouraged to speak about their own experiences. 1 year after the dinner that changed everything, on a starry September night, Lady Eleanor was sitting in the garden with Thomas. The boy had grown. He was taller, stronger. The therapies were helping, and he could now walk short distances without his crutches. "Lady Eleanor, can I ask you a question?" "Of course, my dear." "Have you forgiven Patricia?" Lady Eleanor was silent for a moment, looking at the stars. "I have, Thomas. Not because what she did was right, not because it didn't hurt, but because holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And I have already wasted months of my life. I will not waste another day on bitterness." "And has she gotten better?" "Richard tells me she is in serious treatment, working through her issues. I don't know if we will ever have a relationship again, but I hope she finds peace." "You are very wise." Lady Eleanor laughed. "I am not wise, Thomas. I am just old. And when you live this long, you learn that forgiveness is more for the one who forgives than for the one who is forgiven." They looked at the sky and shared silence, each with their own thoughts. "Thomas?" "Yes, Lady Eleanor? Thank you for seeing me. When I was invisible, you saw me. I will always see you, Lady Eleanor. Always." And so, under the London stars, a 78-year-old woman and an 11-year-old boy sat side by side, witnesses to a transformation that had begun in pain but blossomed in hope. The Ashworth mansion was no longer a symbol of appearances and control. It was a place of healing, of listening, of second chances, where silenced voices found an echo, where invisible people were seen, and where a family had learned, in the hardest way possible, that to care is not to control, that love is not possession, and that dignity is a right, not a privilege granted by others. The light in the mansion's windows shone brightly that night, no longer imprisoning but welcoming, no longer hiding but revealing. And in the heart of every person who lived or visited there, a certainty was solidified. As long as there is someone who sees, who listens, who cares, no one has to disappear, because everyone deserves to be seen, everyone deserves to be heard, everyone deserves to exist fully until their very last day. End. Bov's story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Lady Eleanor, Claire and Thomas has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of courage, dignity and transformation, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment stood out to you the most. Was it little Thomas's courage, Claire's determination, Lady Eleanor's strength in reclaiming her voice? Every day we bring intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, the challenges of real life and the power of empathy and truth. Your presence here is very important to us. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode, with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on what truly matters in life. See you soon.